Well, welcome to another section of How Cool Is That? Today, we are fortunate to have joining us Professor Jill Noel. Jill teaches criminal justice here at Germanna. Tell us about you and your background, Jill.
Hi, Neil, and thank you for having me. So I guess I've been at Germanna a little over maybe 13 years now. And I started off in law enforcement, and I was in law enforcement back in 1992. That's when I started. And I stayed in that field.
So you started when you were 12 then, correct? Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
Okay.
we can say 12. But yeah, I did that. And then at the end of those 8 years, I decided I wanted to get my degree. So I decided to go into security work, thinking that'd be a little easier, a little better schedule. And I started at Germanna. I had created some other schools, but Germanna is where I actually focused my attention on. I thought my goal at that time was just to get that 2-year degree and then just stop. But then I decided, that's probably not what I needed to do. I need to just keep going. And so I did. And I knew I would come back as a teacher one day. I had to just wait until I finished up with everything.
So you've been with Germanna, you said, how many years now?
About 13 years.
13. Full-time, part adjunct, both?
Both. Yeah, started off as an adjunct when I, finally got done with my master's degree. And Irv Comer at that time was the department chair, and he was my teacher too, when I was a student. So yeah, so we talked, and so he brought me in as an adjunct, and that's where it began. So right there. So I just never left at that point. You could say I never left. Even when I was a student, I was always there, going through ODUs. I was just, always there. So I really enjoyed the experience.
So you've been teaching here for a long time. Tell us briefly how you got into law enforcement.
So I always tell my students the crazy story of how I was like really down and out, living in this apartment, my kids, and a deputy sheriff knocked on the door. He was looking for somebody, and I always say, "Oh, I'm glad he wasn't looking for me. I don't know who he was looking for." But anyway, so he knocked on the door, and I'm talking to the officer. "Well, no, officer, he doesn't live here," or whoever it was. And then I'm looking at his uniform, and I started asking questions about him. He looked so sharp and professional. Officer, what's it like? And what are you? He said, "I'm a deputy sheriff. You won't like this though." And he said, and he told me, a little bit about the job. And so I ran and got the newspaper, because that's what was happening back in the day. The newspaper, looked for a job. And at that time, I found out that sheriff's office in Virginia was hiring. Yeah, so I said, and that was my start. I just applied, and they hired me, and that was the beginning for me.
So the pandemic hits. In 2020 was a difficult year for all of us. First of all, we had the pandemic, which was unprecedented and brought us greater challenges than we've probably ever faced as a society. But at the same time, we had a great deal of unrest. It was right around the time of the George Floyd incident, and the horrific incident, and we were struggling with a lot of things. And at the time, there was a lot of, and there still is lingering to some of you, but there was a lot of negativity about the police force. And it strikes me that was, particularly in your situation, Jill, that must have posed, I can imagine teaching in that type of environment. Tell me about, so first half of 2020, everything that happens. Tell me how you felt at that point.
It's a tough time. I guess I had a lot of mixed feelings, because you had a lot going on. You had COVID, and then you had riots taking place in different parts of the country. Just a lot going on. And so I didn't know what to expect from the students, and maybe they didn't know what to expect from me either. But I just continued to teach as I normally would teach the course material. But I did have some pushback from some of the students, in particular in the beginning. A lot of negativity. I won't say a lot, some negativity from certain students. Most of the students were still positive about the police. They really were. But I did have the few that weren't. And no matter what the discussion board question was about or written assignment was about, they were just saying negative things. And I remember at least one of maybe actually a couple of the police officers, in the discussion boards and the responses, they pretty much defending themselves and other police officers. And it had gotten to that point. And I thought, wow. And this, and so when I would see that they had a right to express their opinion, if they didn't agree with something, that's fine, as long as the comments were being respectful and factual. So you're just saying things that just are flatly untrue, then of course, and I've got to step in.
What was it that the students were expressing? Let's start with that. What is it they were concerned about?
Sometimes students would say things like they're all bad, and we need to get rid of all of them. And then there was a time where some people were saying that we should defund the police. And so they would say things like that. And so I would write back and I would say, well, can you explain that? What do you mean by defund the police? What does that look like? And then they think about it. Most times they wouldn't say anything. Well, maybe not that, once they kind of calm down.
Sure.
So by the end of the semester, most of the ones that were, negative like that were weren't so negative now. They were kind of seeing things from the other side, understanding that they weren't all negative.
So you would take an attempt to understand where they were coming from, not necessarily take the in a non-defensive way, but ask them to explain and understand. And it sounds like that a lot of what you heard was not necessarily was not based on something that happened to them, or was it based on things that had happened to them, or was it just based on things they were hearing?
Things they were hearing, that's what I'm getting. It wasn't anything that necessarily happened to them personally, which was another thing too. Well, even if I remember one student writing a paper, which I forget what the paper was about exactly, but I remember the comments in the paper were just the facts that he was stating, it was just all over the place. Like he might be talking about the Civil War and the police and this, it was a different time. I said, but so things that he was saying about the police then, didn't really apply now. The police were different, and you have to look at the training they had and the attitude. You have to look at everything that was going on, and he was just taking things that were happening now and then putting it back in that time period. Yeah, and then they were doing this and back in the Civil War. I'm like, well, wait, what were they doing back in the Civil War? We have to look at what's happening. So then I have to dive into Civil War and police and all of that. There's a lot more to it. So you can't just make these one-line statements and then just run with that. You have to look at all of it. What was taking place? How were the police trained? What was in the South? What was happening in the South and things like that? And then bring it to where we are now. And they still haven't changed. They're still acting like they were back in the Civil War. They're still acting like they were. So we have to look at how they were acting back then, how they're acting now. Totally different in a different time period.
So what you were doing was you were asking to essentially do research and say, tell me more about what you mean. It's like you had made a fund, like I think you talked about the defund the police. I think you said to him, what does that look like? So, which is an excellent question to ask, because so we don't have law enforcement, and how do you feel about the world, what the world will look like then? So you would ask them to back it up with facts. All right. And that seemed to, as you said, so that's one issue. So you've got students. You have a number of your students are police officers. How did they feel?
Oh, they didn't like it, and they felt bad. And they were spending time trying to defend themselves, especially when students were writing in things like, like I said, defund the police, we need to get rid of all of them and things like that. One police officer wrote in and said that when she was on patrol, the people in the community were, or just people there anyway, were just throwing, bricks and bottles at them. And this was nearby. I was stunned. I mean, that's terrible. So, I did, put out a statement to them, that, we have to look at this objectively. Not all the police are behaving poorly. Yes, you do have some that have clearly broken the law, that are clearly not behaving in a way that's appropriate for someone that's, in law enforcement. We know this, but we shouldn't generalize all of them. We shouldn't generalize people in general. I mean, we just shouldn't do those things. Just take them at face value. Then look at the person individually, not just this one group is one way. You wouldn't want anyone to treat you that way.
So the police were generally understanding. I'm sure they got somewhat defensive I can imagine that they would, but that they were able to respond appropriately or respectful, at least in that context. Jill, how did you feel when this all happened? How did you? This was horrible. This was just a horrible, shocking thing when the George Floyd incident takes place. First of all, how did it make you feel? How did you feel?
Well, I felt really bad. It was a low point for me personally, because this is my field. And I know most of the police officers are not like that. And they don't mean any harm. They're good people. Just go to work, they're trying to do the best they can to come on home safely to their families. And it was a bad situation, but some mistakes were made for sure. But I just was hoping that we can move past it, that this wouldn't affect all police all the time. I was hoping that it would just pass. But me personally, yeah, it was very upsetting. And I wanted to make sure that I said things that were appropriate, that were timely, that were fair. And I wanted to make sure I gave both sides an opportunity to voice their opinions.
And it sounds like, from what you described, that that you were able to do that. Tell us more about the outcome. So as you would go through the class, how the tenor of these discussions changed by pushing back and not responding with anger and listening and talking about facts. Tell us about how tenor of the conversation changed over time.
I think after a while, by the end of the semester, most of the students that were negative, I think I had maybe one student that just negative all the way through, but the others were kind of seeing things and like, well, walking it back, some of the rhetoric. Yeah, well, maybe they're not all bad or, things like that. And so it got better. And then the next semester, better. Until now, I really don't hear anything much negative about them. They may say there's some isolated incidences or something like that, or this case, happened or something like that. But they don't just spend all the time like it was before during that period, where it was just completely negative. Well, not for all students. I have to make that clear. Not all, but just for a small percentage of them were talking like that. So it did get better. Here's something else I want to share. I know one time I gave them a scenario because they like scenarios. So I gave them a scenario where they had to, and this was one, well, I'm going to say that one of the other faculty, ADJ faculty, used this scenario in one of his classes. And I said, I like that. So anyway, it was about a person who had a family that had gone away for vacation. Okay, they told the son, hey, I'm going away now. So what does the son do? It's time to party. So yeah, so he invites the buddies over, and they're in there just having a good time. So they go in, they leave the front door wide open, and they're in there, whatever they're doing, illegal things, of course. And one of the neighbors, he knew that the family had gone out, or at least the parents had gone out of country, because they told him that. So he called the police. It's a suspicious activity going on over there. The front door is wide open, and there's a car there parked in the driveway that I hadn't seen before. So of course the police responded. Now we don't know how it was dispatched exactly to the police. That's another thing we have to look at too, because sometimes something gets lost, that translation, they go to the dispatcher, the dispatch, puts the information out there to the police, but you don't know exactly how it was said to the dispatch, and you don't know exactly how the dispatch related to the officers, just to be fair. So anyway, they come there, they don't know what they have going on. They call. Well, the kid's in there, but he doesn't answer the phone. So, and they can see him at first, and then he disappears. So, it's just looking really suspicious. So, it's just starting to escalate now for the police. They don't know what they've got. So, is this a hostage situation? What's going on? So anyway, so eventually they were able to, get the kid to come on out the house and everything. And so, yeah, he was doing some things, I don't know, smoking pot or just something crazy kids do. And it got all resolved. But of course, the community was all in an uproar. They felt like the police were racial profiling or something. I don't know, I'm not sure. And the police had to come back later on and have a community meeting to try to diffuse the tension in the community. They were very angry at the neighbor that called the police in the first place. Yes, they took a lot of anger with that person. So how did the students feel about it? Well, they thought the police were wrong. Should have never responded. Definitely shouldn't have responded the way they did, calling them out on the bullhorn. Hey, come out of the house. That's after they tried to call, So they thought that, again, the police were wrong. And so, of course, I'm asking questions about it. Why were they wrong? And they thought that the neighbor should have just handled things himself, which that was so interesting to me. That's how they thought. And I'm thinking, why? And they said, it would have been just so much easier for the neighbor to go over, do the investigation himself. And yes. And then, everything, I know, but that's it. I like to find this out from the students because this helps me to understand how they're thinking. I said, no, that's not going to be police protocol. They want you to call them. They want to handle this. They don't want, neighbors just going in and investigating and going to someone's house, without them. They don't want that.
And so students didn't understand, and the students felt that the neighbor should have investigated.
Yes.
God, I sure wouldn't in that case, and I would think that would be a great way to escalate the situation, to go over and people start yelling at each other. That just creates another potential issue, I would think.
Right. In another scenario, I would want to ask them about, say, for example, officers would, stop someone, say for speeding or something like that. No, I know. I asked them about the, that's one speeding, or like the dice hanging from the rear view mirror or air freshener, what have you. So if they stop you for that, what do you think about that? And so in the scenario, like the last scenario I gave them, when the officer did stop the vehicle, they saw that it was another officer, and the officer was shocked by it, that it was an officer. So then when the student said, "Oh, the fact that he was shocked means that he was racially profiling. That's why he stopped the person." And my question always is, well, how did he know that the person was a certain race? I mean, how do you know that? And then, well, you saw them when they passed by. If the person is speeding and they're passing by at 80 miles per hour, how would you know? I mean, so that, then it makes them pause again and walk it back. Oh, but still, it shouldn't have been shocked.
So your experience allowed you to walk them through what actually takes place in a situation like that, and have them reason through the facts, and then make their own decision at that point based on the facts are. And sounds like what you experienced was you're able to create a much more open-minded environment.
Sure, and I'll give you one last one too.
Sure.
And then sometimes when there are shootings, and they'll say, well, why didn't the police officer just shoot the individual in their leg? And that's a common one, and that I get that all the time. I don't know why they had to cause such harm. I said, because that's the way they're trained. They're not trained to shoot anyone in their limbs, arms or legs or feet. They're just not. They're trained to shoot center mass of the target presented to them. That's a fact. That's how it is. And I mean, some agencies, many of them now are trained to shoot in the head. That is something else that they've been trained on. That's something more current in the last few years, and that's because sometimes people don't go down. They don't. And I've got video on that. It's just, anyway. So yeah, it's the training. So the training would have to, and it's very difficult to try to aim for an arm or because it's small.
So what did you learn from this whole process, Jill? You've faced as tough a situation both personally and professionally as you could. What did you learn from this for the way you're going to teach in the future? But then what would help us have difficult conversations in our classroom?
I think just keeping it as open as possible, and being able to just show them the other sides, show them the side from the police officers. And again, stressing more with the training. In the class, sometimes I do present training videos of the police. And I want them to see how easy it is to you be trained, you're trained one way, but if the person that you're having this interaction with, if they move a certain way or something like that, then it's going to change your position. Maybe you're trying to get their arm behind their back, but then if they move, your knee could move slightly too. It could be further up on their body. It could be closer to the shoulder, even closer to the neck area. Like I said, depending if the person is fighting you and resisting, and so that makes a big difference too. So you have to consider all this. Yes, they get the training, but when they're going through the training, we're training with each other. No one wants to get hurt. They don't want us to get hurt. So no one's going to be giving you a hard time, because pretty much you're going to comply. But when you get out there in the real world, these people are not complying with you, and they're moving and fighting and doing all kinds of things to you. So, but when you see that 60-second soundbite on TV, all you're seeing is or hearing about what happened at the end. Well, the officer did this, so this unarmed person, but you didn't get all the background at times from the beginning, what happened with that and why they ended up in that position in the first place.
Well, so really a lot of it comes down to sharing the facts, giving a broader perspective, and like I said, we don't have it very often here, but when it does, just making sure that we keep it within certain bounds of civility respect. And if we do that, we're able to come up with a much more cohesive point of view. Well, good. Well, Jill, that is extremely helpful. Wonderful perspective that you share with us. I really appreciate your taking the time to share it with us today. So thank you very much. And for those watching, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on How Cool Is That?
Thank you.